It's Endgame, and Tony Stark has lost his head. 2 of them. Here's your look at the TNSFigures alternate head sculpt portrait of Tony Stark from Avengers Endgame. Yes, 2 alternate head sculpts that you can pick up over at TNSFigures.com and serve as a great substitute for your existing Iron Man 6-scale figure. Something slightly different from what we normally look at on this channel. I'd like to send out a big thank you to the folks over at So Toys that reached out to me over on Facebook and asked if I'd like to have a look at 2 brand new head sculpts that you can pick up over at TNSFigures.com. I'll provide the link down below. The head sculpts depict one Tony Stark, of course minus the body below him, but this would be Tony Stark in the near final moments at the end of Endgame, and hopefully everybody has seen the film by this point. They did send 2 figures that will be available over at TNSFigures.com, and like I said, I'll provide the link down below. They didn't come with a display stand. I just want to stress that. I'm just using one of my defaulted stands that I had in my collection, simply so I could prop Tony Stark's head sculpt up. Now, there are 2 versions. We're going to have a look at those right now. I'm going to take Tony off of the display stand because we don't really need that anymore. They did send 2 versions of the head sculpt. One, a more bruised and battered Tony with a little bit of, considerable amount of blood running down the side of his one eye. And then, the end of Endgame, of course, and that one scenario that, of course, could solve the problem. I debate whether that was the one scenario. I feel like they could have gone a route different than simply that, but nonetheless, these are the 2 head sculpts that they did send my way, and I'm really happy with how these ones turned out. Now, we don't have a Mark 85 out just yet. There's going to be a Hot Toys Mark 85 in the immediate future. There's going to be 2 versions, a regular standard version, then there's going to be a battle damaged version, which is going to give us a very similar looking head sculpt to that. But one thing I've always been really bothered, not necessarily bothered, such a strong word, but I've always really sort of been bothered by the fact that I'm going to bring in this head sculpt right here. Now, this happens to be one Tony Stark head sculpt from one of the more recent released. This is the Mark 80, actually this is the Mark 50, the Mark 85 is going to be coming soon. This is the Mark 50 Tony head sculpt. And while I wouldn't say necessarily anything negative about it from a sculpt level, it's a good likeness of Robert Downey Jr., but it's always really bothered me the fact that they never really give these guys expressions. He's always sort of got this look on his face. His hair may change, and maybe he might have a little bit more blood or a little less blood, depending on what head sculpt you go with. But it always sort of has the same stock look to it. Especially when it came to the die-cast Mark 5, one of my personal favorites, the suitcase armor, came with a head sculpt that looks similar to this. TNSFigures.com actually does have an alternate head sculpt that does have that messy hair, one of the big problems I had with the Hot Toys release. So I'm just going to do a comparison side to side with the one from TNSFigures and the standard stock Hot Toys release Iron Man, so you guys can see the different left and right. This one does, when you look at the 2, definitely feels a little bit more boxier and square in shape. I like that this one has a little bit more contours going for it. The paint is actually really quite good on it, and it does have that lighter hairstyle, the coloring of Tony's hair that he has in Endgame. Now again, this is the battered version of Tony, but I already like the fact he's got an open mouth. We don't see that nearly enough with the Hot Toys releases, so it's nice when you start seeing alternate versions of something different. The paint, like I said, is still good. You've got a nice sheen happening to the face there, and even like the area of like the blood, for example, running down the side of the corner of Tony's eye. If you tilt it slightly, oh, there we go, right there, you can see it's reflecting off of a slightly semi-gloss paint that they used for the blood. I like that. It looks like it's still wet. The hair is really done nicely. Overall, the sculpt is good, and the paint they've done to it is really good as well. It works both well on the side profile, which is always a big thing, as well as the front profile. And like I said, I'm really happy with how this one turned out. It has real life and personality going for it. Then we, of course, can bring in more ill-fated Tony with more severe damage to the side of his face. You can see even like the area of his eye has a slight discoloration to the corner area of it right around the pupil. That's a small touch. I appreciate the fact that they would do as much as that when it came to this particular release. If you look at them side by side, the sculpting isn't that much different, other than, of course, the severe scarring the scabbing on the side of his face. It's been done in a nice dark, very dark red with slight areas of charred black. Really, really turned out nicely. This one has some additional blood running down the corner of his mouth. And again, the same matching scars of the wounds afflicted onto the side of his cheek, as well as the top of his head. The hair is not that much different, really, when you look at them side by side. And there they are on the back to back. Really happy with how these ones turned out. Now, obviously, you're probably going to be asking yourself the same question I would have, is how does it look actually on Iron Man? And while I don't necessarily have Hot Toys Mark 85, because it hasn't come out yet, I do have one thing close to that, and the next best thing to that, and that's the Mark 50. So we'll go ahead and bring that out right now. So I'm going to bring in the Mark 50, and yes, it does look a little bit strange, the fact that Tony's head isn't at the top of the shoulders, but still, nonetheless, I just wanted to bring the figure in so you guys can, of course, see what it looks like with the TNSFigures version head sculpt. Normally, this would have been the head that would have come included with the figure, and there, of course, is this little collar piece that you want to insert into the socket before you go ahead and add, there we go, before you add Tony's head. And that just snaps in place like so. I mean, again, not taking nothing away. That's a good looking head sculpt, and we're definitely one of the best that Hot Toys has put out. But let me just show you what it looks like with the alternate head sculpt, the one released by TNSFigures. We're going to go ahead and take the battle damaged head sculpt, and we're just going to do the exact same thing, fit that into the socket. It works with basically the same universal ball socket. So basically, you can either use it for an Iron Man die-cast figure, for example, or you can use it really with any 6-scale figure, I suppose. If you had a more casually dressed Tony, you could most definitely use that as well. But for this purpose, I'm just going to snap that in place, or place it down onto the peg. And that's what it looks like when you've attached it to the top. Now again, just doing the comparison side to side. The head sculpts are roughly about the same. I might even credit the TNS figure version as being slightly longer in the head. But again, I feel it works really well with this particular suit, even though, again, it's not necessarily the suit he's wearing at the end of Endgame, but it's close enough for the time being. Then we can go ahead and add the battle damaged head sculpt. I love the look of this one. We're going to go ahead and pop this off the exact same way. Finding and retrieving the ball socket at the top, we're going to just fit this down inside. There we go. One thing I did notice, though, is when you are putting it down onto the ball joint, I feel like the socket could be slightly larger. It does fit, and it stays in place, but I feel like I really have to push down on it. But it still does, and does the job rather nicely. There's the two different versions of the head sculpt. And I really like it. I think they did a good job on this. Again, you've got the scarring on the side. Unfortunately, because of the scarring, it may not suit particularly this armor, because the armor is a little bit more pristine. But if you look at it, I mean, it's a pretty good looking likeness of Tony Stark. There he is again in his Mark 50 suit. This will, of course, all come into better play when the 85 actually gets released, because then you can use those new head sculpts, release these ones here, for example, and you can swap it out perhaps with the one that's going to come included with it. Or if you would like to certainly make your own Tony from scratch, you can take an existing 6-scale figure if you want a casually dressed Tony Stark, and maybe not to the extreme of his scarred face. Certainly just a battle damaged or slightly bleeding Tony Stark would be a perfect fit for just a casually dressed Tony Stark as well. Again, really happy with how these ones turned out. If you guys are interested in picking these ones up for yourself, let's go ahead and grab the battle damaged head. We'll leave poor headless Iron Man just sitting in the background there, though. But if you guys are in the market and you'd like to pick up some interesting custom head sculpts for your 6-scale figures, I'll provide the link down below to TNSFigures.com. Again, I'd like to send out a big thank you to the folks over at So Toys that reached out to me and asked if I'd like to have a look at it. I mean, based on that and the amount of detailing that I'm seeing here physically in hand, because obviously when you see these images online, you always really like to see what they actually look like in hand. And I'm hoping in a review like this, you guys were able to kind of see a close-up look at the amount of detail that they put into their pieces. And now that I've seen these physically in hand, there's a bunch of them over there on their website that I'd like to pick up for myself. Primarily, the one I'm really seeking out the most is the Mark 5 Tony Stark head sculpt. Simply because, again, it's going to have the hair draping forward the way it looks actually in the film, and not necessarily what we ended up getting with the Mark V, which really wasn't that far off from this one right here. Again, if you guys are interested, I can provide the link down below to TNSFigures.com. You can click on that, head on over, and see some of the cool custom head sculpts and other accessories that they sell over there for your 6-scale figure collection. Today we were having a look at something a little bit different, but still pretty cool nonetheless. We were having a look at some custom endgame Tony Stark heads suited for your 6-scale figures. If you guys are new to this channel and digging this guy's content, certainly consider hitting that subscribe button down below and stay tuned because there's going to be a lot of videos coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.